the announcement. Oh, and we've got the game jam coming up soon, so if you want to know about that.
Yeah.
So yeah, we've got Ian Hamilton here from the UK. He's going to give us a talk about game accessibility.
Right, well hello. Some of you guys have already met already, including some people who took me out and got me pissed all day. But yeah, if you already met me, hello again. If you haven't, my name's Ian, and I've got a bit of a background in accessibility. So by accessibility, not in terms of like the easy barrier to entry stuff, but specifically about disabilities and how that relates to gaming. So I kind of got started in that through designing specifically for people with really profound disabilities, and then gradually from there moved into kind of thinking about how that applies to kind of wider audience, more mainstream games, and then started working on kind of guidelines and advising studios at a publisher level, and now working on trying to spread some of that knowledge through the wider industry, which is why I'm here. So what I'm going to do today, I'm going to talk a bit about the basics, kind of a general overview. So an intro to kind of what it actually is, a few common misconceptions and a bit of myth busting, and a few kind of examples of the types of things that you can bear in mind. So if there is any kind of more advanced stuff that anyone's interested in, so anything from autistic kids to how to prove a business case, just ask me a question at the end, or over a drink later, or by email, anything, that's all good. So to start with, what it actually is. So as I mentioned, this is kind of disability related accessibility. So to explain properly what it is, I first need to explain a little bit about what disability is. So I've got this guy to help me out with this. So this guy was doing an investigation for a newspaper back in England, and it's probably quite obvious looking at the picture to see that he's disabled, and also looking at the picture you probably got some kind of idea in your head of what his disability might be. So from looking at the picture, if you know kind of a bit about the area, then you might be guessing from kind of the way he's holding his hand and his knees that he might have cerebral palsy, in which case that's kind of right, he does have cerebral palsy, but that's not actually his disability. So cerebral palsy isn't a disability, cerebral palsy is the name of a medical condition. So you might also be thinking about his wheelchair. So again, yeah, he's in a wheelchair, but that's not a disability. So a wheelchair is a piece of assistive technology, like a pair of glasses or something. It's actually the opposite of disability. That's actually what's allowing him to go about his day. So the thing in this picture that is actually causing him to be disabled is the flight of steps behind him. So up until the point where he came to those steps, he was able to go about his day just fine. So disability is actually when your medical condition comes up against a barrier that prevents you from going about your day-to-day lives. So these kind of barriers that people come up against, whether it's a flight of stairs, or a shelf that's too high, or the red and green teams in Call of Duty, all those kind of barriers are all things that are designed that way by designers, by people. So it's kind of a bit of a heavy thing to wrap your head around, the fact that as designers and developers we actually cause people to be disabled, but it also works the other way, that by actually understanding what kind of barriers there are, we can actually avoid them or remove them and prevent disabilities from happening in the first place. So the state that things currently are in the games industry is there's kind of the startings of awareness. People generally have some kind of idea that there are these kind of issues around, and that something either should or could be done about it. There's usually the same kind of things that get in people's way. So some people may kind of experiment with a single feature and stuff, but there are things that get in the way of taking it kind of to the next level. And it's always the same things, the same common misconceptions that people have. So it's all the same things that I used to think accessibility was a ridiculous idea because of these kind of misconceptions. And it's the same things that I've heard time and time again from studios. It's these four things. So I'll just talk through each one at a time. So the first one, this is the really common one you hear, is people assuming that it hardly affects anyone at all. It's the standard thing that I get told time and time again, why do we do this for something that only affects less than 1% of the population? So that isn't a fact it's less than 1% of the population, it's an assumption. So the actual figures, kind of general prevalence statistics for disability, is actually more like 15%. So that's big numbers. And it kind of varies a little bit between countries and the kind of methods of how it's measured, but that's basically around 15%. Then the next thing, I mean that's enough for some people, that's enough of a reason to obviously think it's important, but people who are kind of, especially more from the publisher and exec kind of businessy side, ask the completely valid question of, well, okay, fair enough, that's the general population, but how do you know that those people are actually playing our games? Which obviously is a valid question, and that's one that these guys were pondering. So I see most people in the PopCat, people who do Bejeweled and Pegwheel and that kind of stuff. So they were thinking that exact same question, so they commissioned some research. They did some quite a wide-ranging study, taking the original 15% base figure of disabilities in America, doing a survey of all their audience. It's quite big, I can't remember the exact numbers, but it was a lot of people anyway, to see if that 15% figure is represented amongst gamers. They did their study, they got the results back, and what they found out was that the 15% figure actually didn't apply. The figure they got back was 20. So it's actually a higher proportion of people with disabilities with gamers than the general population. Which kind of makes sense when you think about it. I mean, if you went out and, I'm not suggesting anyone tries this, but if you went out and broke your arm, you wouldn't all of a sudden decide you don't like games anymore. If anything, you'd be more likely to play games because of the time you've been signed off work, so at home, nothing to do. But basically, people who've got disabilities have got all exactly the same reasons for wanting to play games as anyone else. But plus extra ones as well. So you've got things like games even being prescribed by doctors as physiotherapy, and games being used as self-medication as well. So to avoid having to take painkillers, people are quite often playing games because it's such an intense distraction, they're not actually thinking about the pain they're in. And all kinds of other things, so kind of like empowerment and being able to take part in an even playing field. So kind of the classic thing of people playing World of Warcraft and being able to take part just on the basis of their avatar, without any of the kind of preconception stuff people put on them. And also the freedom to do what you want as well. So there's no such thing as an inaccessible flight of stairs in World of Warcraft. Everyone can go and climb a mountain if they want to. So it's stuff that affects a lot of people and can have a really strong impact. And especially that kind of end of it where you're talking about the really profound impairments. So there's all kinds of stories of people, someone's been in a horrific car accident, is left quadriplegic. So pretty much almost completely paralysed, thinking that's it, their life is over now, there's nothing they can do. But then through discovering gaming, finding that there is actually something that they can do independently and meaningfully, actually gives them that motivation they need to get back into their living their life again. So it's quite an interesting moment when you kind of start thinking about things in that kind of way and realising that this profession that you're in, up to that point, you kind of thought was, might be able to entertain people and that kind of stuff. But actually it's really got the power to change people's lives. So that's the numbers. It's actually a really big thing that can affect a lot of people. Is the main point for that. So the next one is we don't have the budget for it, which again is a perfectly reasonable thing to think. I mean, you're talking about features, and features require time and money. But it doesn't actually have to be like that, because there's a lot of things which, if you think about early enough in the project, actually don't have cost associated. So when you really get costs involved, it's when you try and think about something at the end of the project and try and retrofit. Obviously, retrofitting anything is a nightmare. So if I give you an example, say if you've got you're trying to decide whether your colour scheme is going to be blue or green. If you do that at the very start of the project, that's just a decision. There's zero cost. It's exactly the same price to make green assets as blue assets. But if you come back at the end and try and retrofit, as well as reworking everything, all the retesting and everything you've got to do, that's when it starts to get expensive. So if you actually just think about these things at the very, very start of the project, like game design document stage, there's a lot that you can do really, really easily and cheaply. And there's a really nice example of this in, I think there's going to be a fair few of you guys going to Game Jam, and last year's Game Jam, quite a few venues we had an accessibility challenge running. We had 20 teams taking it up, and the one thing that all these teams had in common was the level of accessibility they achieved by far outstrips anything that you see in kind of mainstream AAA titles, and that's in the space of 48 hours. So that's a really nice example of how much you can do. So I should, just an example of one of the games that came out of it. So you can see kind of a couple of things they've got in there, so like high contrast visuals and colourblind friendly colour schemes and choice of input devices and all kinds of stuff. Those are really, really nice stuff. At the same time as making the game, which is really good as well. And then something that actually interesting came out there as well, through thinking about motor impairments, that actually gave them their starting point for their mechanic, which is quite an interesting thing that often comes out of accessibility stuff, is innovation. So if you're trying to innovate, it can be quite difficult to innovate if you're trying to tackle the same problem that lots of other people have. Because people really aren't that different. If you give different people the same problem to solve, you'll often get similar answers coming out of it. But if you're actually trying to tackle a different problem, that allows you to see things in a different way and think of things that you wouldn't necessarily have done before. So there's one really, really nice example I like, which is actually outside of games. It's something that everyone, including especially Lena, is using it right now, is a keyboard. So keyboards, when they were invented, that's obviously like a really revolutionary thing that completely changed the world. But keyboards weren't invented by trying to think about a way of improving writing and taking it to the next level. Keyboards were actually invented as a way for blind people to be able to write. So through thinking about that, just seeing the problem and seeing kind of a slightly different problem to solve, actually gave people different ideas about it. So. The next one we got is something that's actually been hearing a lot more of because of kind of the confusion with the accessibility relating to kind of low barriers to entry and stuff, which is that you're going to take this game, this nice concept, which is appealing to a decent amount of people, and then to be able to make it cater for these other groups of people, you need to dilute the experience and break it down to the lowest common denominator. But what you're actually doing, if you were to do that, then you're taking that core concept, because you're reducing it, you're actually making that concept accessible to no one. So you basically fail if you do that. So what it's actually about is, rather than trying to reduce things in lowest common denominator and stuff, it all comes down to two basic things. So it's either reinforcement, so conveying the same information in different ways, or flexibility, so giving people options to be able to play it in a way that's more suited to them. So those kind of things aren't at all about diluting. It's about taking exactly the same concept, but allowing more people to experience that same thing. So we've got one last one, which is, this is the biggie, which often puts people off, is they... So it often puts people off is going to start thinking about it, and maybe start thinking about something like colour blindness, for example. That's a common one that people start thinking about because it's so common. You don't have to be a very large indie before you're statistically probably going to have someone that's colourblind on the team. But then kind of taking it to the next level, it just seems like such a massive, massive field that you can't possibly get your head around. So this is often what people have in their head when they think about it. So obviously it's hard enough to make a game just based on what's appealing to you, let alone if you're trying to do kind of like casual versus hardcore stuff as well. So how do you even begin to design a game for all these kind of different groups? Well, the answer is that you actually don't design for all these groups. So if you think back to the guy in the wheelchair at the start, this is just a list of medical conditions. So what you're actually designing for is the barriers. And there's lots of different things in here which actually face the same kind of barriers. So taken, for example, MS and arthritis, things that have got nothing for medically, they actually come across the same kind of barriers with motor controlling games. Once you actually start grouping things together into those barriers, there's only actually a couple of things you need to think about. Which is these. That's all it actually boils down to. So you've got barriers that are to do with people's ability to see, hear, understand, and control things. And that's it, that's all it boils down to. There is also another one, which you might occasionally come across, which is speech. It's obviously not a big issue, and most games don't have speech control and stuff in them. But even taking it into account, there's 5 things. That's all you need to think about those 5 areas. So what I'm going to do now is just run through each of those areas. I mean, I can't tell you everything there is to know about it, but I can just give you one example from each of those areas, just so you can get a bit of a flavour of the kind of things that are involved. So, the first one is vision. So visual impairment, ranging from everything from kind of your text formatting to all the way through to making audio games for blind people. But by far the most common thing is colour blindness, which affects 8% of males. So especially if you're developing a male-oriented game, so things like classic things like Call of Duty, male-dominated game, that can be a really sizable chunk of your audience that are affected by it. So, on the note of Call of Duty, I'll show you about the blurry shot. This is team deathmatch in Call of Duty, and you can see the important things in here, which is the indicators of the team. So there's a few different types of colour blindness. It is actually possible to be completely colourblind and only see in black and white, but it's really, really rare. By far the most common is red-green colour blindness, which means you're missing just a certain type of receptor, which means you can't distinguish between the two. Which means that the red and the green team in Call of Duty both become the brown team. So next time you get killed by someone in your own team in Call of Duty, to be fair, it might be just some annoying 14-year-old doing it on purpose, but there's a good chance it's just because of this. So what they actually did in this one is Black Ops, and they actually includes the colourblind mode in this. So all they did for that was a really simple thing, because if you can't distinguish red and green, you can still distinguish other colours. You just got a bit of a limited palette. So you can still distinguish blue and yellow really easily. So you just did a really simple thing of adding a little bit of yellow to the red and a little bit of blue to the green. So it's kind of orange and turquoise, the team colours. Which then means if you're red-green colourblind, it looks like that. So even though you've still got the reduced palette, you can still actually tell the colours apart. And if you so that's quite a simple feature to include. But Black Ops, which obviously is pretty reliant on the multiplayer and pretty well dominated, and quite famously sold $1 billion worth of copies in its first 6 weeks. That's probably quite a profitable feature for it to be. So this whole thing with kind of offering different colour palettes and stuff, that's quite an extreme example. The reason they had to go down that route is because it's a really fast-paced game. There's a much simpler solution which you can use in most other instances, which is just to not use colour alone. If you can back up the information you're communicating by colour through some other means, like a symbol or a shape or a pattern. It's like the snakes game that I saw earlier. Snakes have a different pattern or something like that. And this is the classic example for that. So there's plenty of these kind of mastery games and stuff where it's purely based on colour, but because the jewel's got a shape as well, even if you have no colour vision at all, you can still play just fine. So another example as well, a real classic example, kind of related to the deathmatch colours, is indicators on maps. If you have a look at Grand Theft Auto, it's a really nice example of that, where everything on the map that's got has a colour also has a symbol as well. And it's a good example as well of that kind of thing, like this, like the map on Grand Theft Auto. It's just that kind of reinforcement is stuff that's just good for everybody. It makes it more easy to tell at a glance what it actually is. It just so happens there's a certain section of the audience for whom it's really, really useful. So next up, hearing. So if you've got hearing impairments, the obvious thing is subtitles, which, although they're not always done very well, there is at least a good kind of general awareness of subtitling. And there's Ubisoft, for example, require all their games now to have to be subtitles. But the thing with subtitling is that if there's any audio guys in particular in the room, or girls, sorry, in the room, we'll be very keen to tell you there's so much more than just what's said in the game. So many audio cues, so much important information that's conveyed by sound effects. So we've got a nice example here from, this one's from Gears of War, but it's quite common in first-person shooting games. So you can tell instantly, just from looking at that screenshot, that he's being shot from the front. He's also being shot from behind on the left. So it's got the little radar thing showing where. So if it didn't have that visual indication on the screen, the only way that you'd be able to tell that he was also being shot from the side would be through the stereo sound. Obviously, if you can't hear, you have no access to information and dead, which would be quite annoying. And although actually being deaf is quite rare as disabilities go, it's one of those things that has so many other uses. So people who, for example, are playing in a noisy room, or in my case, forced to play on mute because my wife is watching the soap operas in the same room. But needless to say, there's lots of people who benefit from subtitles. Another common one is if English isn't your first language and you have a hard time, like, sorry, I'm doing my subtitles. Yeah, you have a hard time distinguishing like the different accents and stuff.
And parents.
Sorry?
Parents are sleeping with children.
Yes.
As well.
That's a big one. Yeah. Yeah, especially people have to play at 3 o'clock in the morning, so that's any time they can play.
Yeah.
Yeah, so next one then is cognitive. So this is quite a broad area. So it's basically anything to do with kind of mental function, so the ability to remember things or understand difficult concepts and that kind of stuff. Which is actually, it's kind of a bit of a hard thing to get your head around. No pun intended, but it's actually something that the games industry does really well. So not through the intention of developing for people with cognitive impairments, but I'm sure there's plenty of people in here who play games on Atari ST days. So you go out and get your game, and they come with like 30, 40 page one. Whereas now, you go and play a game that's got nice kind of contextual hints and gradually introduces you to concepts, which is obviously much better for everybody. No one's going to read a 40-page manual for Jimmy Watts while sneaking it, but for people who, for example, if you've got short-term memory issues, that's so much more effective being able to actually see stuff in context than trying to remember back to a big page of text at the start. But there's one thing in particular for cognitive impairments that is really, really common. And it's actually the most common type of impairment out of anything at all, for any type of disabilities, which is literacy. So people don't really know very much about low reading age because there's such a big stigma around it. So you're not exactly going to rock up the pub and say, hi everyone, I can't read. So even people who do have low literacy will really commonly lie and actually tell people they can read fine. And so you kind of notice people who will always order last in the restaurant and order what somebody else had, or always seem to have left their glasses at home and that kind of stuff. So it's actually really, really common. It's a bit dependent on countries, but usually it's around 15% of the population who've got a primary school or lower reading age. So it's people who can actually read, but the reading ability is low enough that they wouldn't be able to, for example, fill out a job application or read their kids a story, something like that. So it's huge amounts of the population. Obviously, if you've got textual information in your game, then it'll have an impact on that as well. So there's all kinds of things you can do with like text formatting and style language and stuff, but there's one really, really simple thing which can make a massive difference. Which is this. So there's something here which makes a really, really huge difference. And that is this here. So just that little thing that says click to continue. And the reason why that's so important is because of what the alternative is. So if you didn't have that, I'm sure you've seen this plenty of times in games, you have a set amount of time, then disappear again. So the problem with doing that is that there is no set period of time you can put it up for that actually works. So no matter what period of time you choose, it's either going to be but for too short amount of time for people to be able to read it who've got low reading ability, but for too long amount of time for people who can read well. So it's impossible to actually have a decent amount of time. So if you just have text dismissed on an action instead of a time period, then everyone can just read it exactly the pace that suits them. So next is motor. Generally speaking, motor in kind of other industries is more kind of about crutches and wheelchairs and that kind of stuff, but in games it's connector side. It's generally about your ability to use your hands and operate a controller. So there's a lot of things you can do again, so things like simple control schemes and support for different devices. But there's one thing in particular which makes a really huge difference. So again, I've got someone to help me explain this one. This guy. So he had a stroke when he was a teenager, and he recovered fairly well, but he doesn't have any control over the right hand side of his body. But obviously he didn't have the slightest bit of interest in giving up playing his Xbox, so the way that he found to play is to get his controller, hold it underneath his arm, and then he actually holds the controller, moves, pushes the stick against his arm to control one stick, then controls the other stick with his thumb, then has those couple of fingers to press buttons with. So people generally go to quite a lot of lengths, but there's certain things, so you can see from the way he's holding it, that he can only actually reach a few buttons, so he can't physically reach the left trigger and the right face buttons at the same time. So there's a really easy solution to that. The solution has been around in games pretty much from the beginning, but in recent years it's gone astray a bit. So I'm not sure how many people in the room remember this game, but this is just to show you how long it's been around for. And the solution is option number 2, which is the redefine keys button. So a bit of more of a recent example, this is Counter-Strike, the latest Counter-Strike. Just having that option of being able to reconfigure keys. Obviously it's useful for loads of people who just want to have their own custom setup and don't like the way that their designers decided you should control the game. But like that guy previously, if he can't physically reach those buttons, if he's got that remapping option, he can then choose to move that trigger he can't reach up onto the face button, and he can control it just fine. So that's really common. So people, for example, who've quadriplegic, it's really common to kind of balance your pad on your lap, and even though you haven't got fine motor control in your fingers, you can just kind of operate stuff in the face using your hands. So all you need is just to be able to move stuff off the triggers onto the face button, and you can play it fine. So just that one little thing, remapping, which has been a real shame to see it's disappeared from consoles in the last couple of generations. It's only kind of just starting to make it come back now, but yeah, if you're doing console stuff and you can do remapping, then you make a lot of people happy. Oh, and the other stuff as well. Valve in general are amazing accessibility. They're one of the few people that actually recruits disabled playtesters, and it shows. So this, for example, all the other options on here, everything on the screen is really, really useful for disabled people. So, being able to toggle, for people who've got, who haven't got a lot of strength, holding down the button can be a problem. So they've got an option to be able to toggle holding down or pressing for things like that. And things like the sensitivity and even being able to swap the sticks for people who are left-handed. All that kind of stuff is all really useful. So then we've got the last one, which is speech. So speech control isn't something that's very common at the moment. It's kind of becoming more common. But unlike a lot of other areas, the way it's been implemented so far has always been really good. I'm yet to see a bad example of speech control yet. So what's good about it is that it's offered as an alternative. So for example, like the main menu and the main Xbox menu, you can control by Kinect, by voice controls. You've also got all the options to control it by pad as well. And that's quite common because not many people use speech control. Anytime it's implemented in the game, there's usually a joypad equivalent for the speech commands. But where it really becomes a problem is if you're playing online multiplayer. Cool. So, right, online multiplayer. So the reason it's a problem on multiplayer is if you've got voice chat. So not just for people who've got speech problems, but people who've got hearing problems as well are routinely, deliberately kicked out of games because they're not communicating well enough with the rest of the team. So that's obviously a bit of a problem, because obviously for those people, they're getting thrown out of the games, but for the other people, I mean, especially if there's people who are playing competitively and practicing the tournaments and stuff, it's pretty unfair on them to have to play with people who are communicating the same level as well. So it's a bit of a kind of a hard one to solve. But there was one game which I don't think they probably made the decision to include that feature for that reason, but the feature sold it really, really nicely, which is Halo Reach. So in Halo Reach, in the matchmaking, it's got social preferences, and the first one on there is chattiness. So again, probably the reason for doing that was to try and solve problems of annoying 14-year-olds, but what it does allow is people who are playing in kind of that professional way and need to have the constant communication to only play with other people who want to play with that, and the other end of the scale as well. So if you can't speak or can't hear, you can choose to play with other people who don't mind that at all.
Sorry, how do they measure that? How do they measure chattiness? How do they measure your tone is polite?
No, they don't at all. No, it's purely matchmaking.
Okay.
So you just say, I want to talk a lot, or I don't want to talk at all. It just matches you up with other people who've chosen the same thing. Yeah, it just comes down to that same thing again, just offering people a bit of flexibility.
I'm not sure if it's related, but occasionally, like I play a lot of multiplayer games, you get kicked or choose servers based on language choice. So after you play on service that they'll say, oh, do you speak Russian, do you speak German, do you speak Korean or something?
Yeah.
And so it's often handy to be able to specify in some way. Well, it's kind of
totally.
you're impaired if you can't speak English, or if you can't, and character sets and stuff like that, if you can't access the game.
Exactly the same.
It's often the case for a team where lots of people speak different languages and you try and coordinate it.
Yeah, and that's the thing, it's no fun when you go into one of those servers and get kicked out of the game straight away.
And they say, oh yeah, no typing in boxes in public.
Yeah.
They're typing in Korean, that's fine.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing, it's just there's different preferences. Some people don't mind, some people do, but you just let people have that choice and problem solved.
And specify somewhere, these are languages I speak.
Yeah. Yeah, cool. So that's the 5 different areas. So as I said, it's just kind of to give you a general overview of some of the kind of things. So I'm going to give you a link in a minute where you can go and find out some more information. But by far the best way to learn more about it is just to actually spend some time with people who've got disabilities. So like I said, the commonest one that people normally find in teams is colour blindness. So it's so common, it's not something that affects you, they're likely to be working in the games industry. Even fine artists who not they often realise when they first start going down the path being an artist, but yeah, so it's quite common to actually just have a chat with people. The colour blindness as well, there's some nice simulation apps that you can get for phones, so either iPhone or Android, I assume maybe other ones as well, but it's quite interesting looking through as of some of these colour blinds. But yeah, so just speak to people with disabilities. If you're working for a bigger company that's actually got proper playtesting recruitment, just include a few people with disabilities in your playtesting and you learn some amazing stuff. But even if not, just if you've got elderly relatives and anything like that, just have a chat with them about the kind of things that you find difficult. Even if they're not gamers, you still get some interesting stuff out of it. Yeah, so that's it. There's a lot that you can do and a lot that you can learn. And especially if you go beyond, this is kind of the basics that can kind of apply to a lot of games. You can kind of go to that next level and do stuff for specific, really profoundly disabled demographics, and that's when you can do some really, really amazing stuff. So I've seen, like, for example, a 6-year-old kid who did some play testing with, who was low functioning autistic, so he was completely non-verbal, no language ability at all, and you really limited understanding of what's going on around him. And severe cerebral palsy as well. So he had almost no voluntary motor movement. But through the engagement of the game that's put in front of him, the actual reward of interacting with the character on the screen, he was actually able to make, he saw this before I was actually able to make his first voluntary motor movement with his hands. And as a result of making that voluntary motor movement, they're going to be able to get him into a communications device, which is just like a grid of symbols, cycles through them, he just presses his hands and he gets the right symbol. And as a result of that, be able to communicate with his family for the first time. And being able to get to that point was purely because of the engagement that that game had for him. So if you go to that kind of level, there's some amazing, amazing stuff that games can do. But even in the short term, though, there's so much stuff that can be done so easily to reach more people. And all it takes is just, if you spend, at the start of a project, just spend 5 minutes thinking about those 5 groups. People who can't see, hear, understand, control, or speak as well as other people, then you'll be able to make a really big difference. That's it. Has anyone got any questions? We got time? Yeah.
So just one quite common thing I hear is people having problems with motion sickness in play games. Are there any ways of preventing that?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, there's quite a few things. Because motion sickness is basically because of a mismatch between what you're seeing and what your brain expects to see. And quite a big cause of it is due to the actual field of view. So the gap that you're seeing in between the screen and the gap of your room, and so kind of what you see on the screen, then your room next to it, are not matching up. So if you can allow control over field of view, that makes a really, really big difference. And then other things as well is, so if there's any visual programmers in the room, you're probably going to hang me for this, but things like motion blur and weapon bob and those kind of things. All those kind of things, which is really nice for some people, but that can cause motion sickness so badly that it can actually force people to stop playing. So no, I'm not saying exclude those from the games because they're good things, but if you can at least have the option in there to turn it off, which I think actually no, it doesn't. Not that might do. But yeah, you get games that give you the option of actually turning that off. So if you've got control over field of view and the ability to turn off weapon bob, particularly if you've got 2 things at the same time, so if you've got walk bob and weapon bob at the same time, that can really make people ill. If you've just got the option of turning them off, then it can make a difference. The reason you hear a lot about it is because the field of view thing is people are developing games for a console field of view and then porting that to PC. Whereas when you're looking at something on a PC, the distance from the screen and the size of the screen is really different. So you need to have different, something like 60 degrees you should have for a console and at 90 on the PC, but people want to just port them straight across and it just starts making people ill. Yeah, good question.
Can you talk a bit more about games for totally blind?
Yeah, so that's a really good one. So there's a lot of games which are, say for example, like first-person shooters and stuff, which is so visual that it is really difficult to be able to adapt something like that. But just the same as the guy who had stroke, people go to quite extreme lengths. So if you look up, there's some nice videos of a guy playing, which one is it? Abe's Odyssey, I think, and playing Zelda on the SNES as well, and completing them both just by perseverance and like trial and error, going around the maps and like building up his visual map of how the levels work. But the reason he's able to do that is especially in Oddworld is because the sound design is so good. So if you've got distinct sounds for all different actions, then it's much easier to build up a picture of what's happening. Actually, one really, really nice example of that is fighting games. So stuff like Mortal Kombat, Street Fighter, all that kind of stuff, they've got really good sound design. Every single move has got the same distinct sounds. So there is actually a video of someone who is totally blind beating Ed Boon in Mortal Kombat, which is beating his own game. And just purely because of that, because of the sound design. Yeah, so if you're actually wanting to design games, there's actually not very many people who are completely blind to be just registered as blind. Most people still have some kind of residual vision, but it's usually enough that you have to design to not rely on visuals. But even if you just do things like have decent sized buttons and text and high contrast, then that can help a lot for kind of less severe visual impairments. But Yeah, so if you're making stuff for people who are completely blind, there's really nice couple of games that are worth looking at on iOS called Papa Sangre and Nightjar. You know that?
Love Papa Sangre.
Yeah.
The best.
Have you
Relies completely on audio cues, pretty much.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah, have you played Nightjar?
No.
Nightjar's a sequel.
Oh!
And because Papa Sangre did so well, they had a bit of extra money for the second one.
All right.
You know Benedict Cumberbatch?
Yeah.
Yeah, he does all the voiceover.
Sold.
Yeah, that's the nice thing about doing an audio game as well. Your budget's free to spend the night. You don't have to worry about.
And the voice acting is really good because it's, you know, it's got to be because it's the only thing you've got. You've got this narrator telling you how everything is, and that woman's voice in Papa Sangre, just I could listen to her talk all day.
What's it called, sorry?
Papa Sangre, so it's PAPASANGRE, two words.
And the sequel's Nightjar, which is one word.
Nightjar.
It's survival horror.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I can think of Alien being a very good game for blind people with, like, you know, the monitor going off when the alien's coming in. And,
Yep.
Yeah.
Or any muds.
Yep.
Yeah,
no, that's
obviously
just
dimensions that were text-based. So there's still a few that are around.
Yeah, they're still around. They're really popular with blind people. So there's a few things. So it's just basically anything you can have in text is really easy to be made accessible for people who are blind. So as well as that, things like roguelikes and like interactive fiction, all that kind of stuff is really popular.
Yeah, one really good thing in Papa Sangre, like it tells you to put headphones in so that you get the full stereo experience, and you need it. Is at the very start, you're in a dark room, you can't see anything, there's just a black screen on your phone, and you've got a step, and you can sort of hear your footsteps, and then you can hear things sort of echoing off around you, and you've got to figure out how you are in the room, and yeah, it's pretty mind-blowing like to just get in that headspace and be like, I can't see, I can't rely on anything that I can see.
Do you know when it was made, sorry?
About 2-3 years ago?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
2 years ago.
It's very recent.
Yeah.
It's got amazing technology in it as well. It's there's a thing called binaural recording, which a couple of naughty heads gets. So, but binaural recording basically, it's been around since like the 70s, which is basically based on the principle that even though your ears are just stereo, you can actually hear and surround sounds. And the reason for that is you got things like Doppler effect and like how sound actually sounds through your ear tissue and stuff. That allows you to tell whether something's in front of you, behind you, that kind of stuff. So binaural recording is when they actually make a model of a head and put little microphones in the ears, so it captures all that spatial information. So if you listen to a binaural recording, actually if you look up binaural barbershop on YouTube, you have that. That's amazing. It's such accurate 3D surround sound. It's basically you're having a haircut and you hear some like going all around your head with clippers and stuff. It's really like freakily
Play
accurate.
Papa Sangre in a dark room by yourself, like with your headphones in, just completely pitch black. It's amazing.
Yeah, so that's it. They've basically done the digital version of that, so they simulate the binaural effect. So you get really accurate 3D surround sound just through headphones.
That's really easy to do too. The head-related transfer function, it's called. And if you know anything about DSP, it's really easy to do. There's lots of open source and public domain implementations of that, and then you can just put any sound you want in any distance and position. Really easily. Just apply that fairly quickly.
Yes, it gets interesting when you combine it with something like Connect as well. And you're actually picking up sounds and moving them around. Oh, I shouldn't have said about that. NDA breaking it. Yeah, I really recommend checking those ones out. And that's a really nice example as well of the kind of thing I was talking about earlier. So things like the typewriter where you can do some really innovative stuff. So those games were developed specifically for people who are blind, but just through doing that, they hit on obviously the idea of a survival horror game with no visuals, which is obviously a pretty amazing idea in itself. So as a result of that, they got a massive blockbuster game. Like the sequel, Nightjar, has got like strings of awards and battle animation and made massive amounts of money. Even though they designed it just for a tiny niche audience, it was so fun for so many other people as well. And actually runs on the run, if anyone knows that as well. Yeah, another classic example, because that came straight out of like blind audio gaming. But because they come up with the idea of a game that's really fun without any visuals, and then you can play in other circumstances when you... Actually, has anyone not heard of it? Everyone knows it, yeah? Put your hand up if you haven't heard of it. Right, Canada. Okay, so it's just like you know, get like your Nike Airband and stuff like that. It's like a running thing, yeah. They combine that with a zombie game. So it has no visuals. You just put your headphones in your ear, and as you're jogging, you hear zombies catching up to you and chasing you. So you get to chase the zombies. But yeah, same thing. Such a brilliant idea. It came originally from Lions, but so enjoyable by so many people, and it's sold massive amounts as a result.
I couldn't imagine that being enjoyable to someone who's actually blind.
Run chased into the road with a zombie.
A sense of humour?
Oh yeah, sure, yeah.
Actually, yeah, there's, you mentioned the thing about the aliens.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point as well. There's a game called Terraformers, I think. It was done kind of as a university project, but that was basically making a 3D first-person shooter that's playable by people online. And they handle exactly that kind of stuff, like a pingable sonar map and
Yeah.
that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that worked really well. Yeah. What was that technology you talking about with 3D sound? Like,
Binaural.
Yeah. So you can actually use that with headphones?
Yeah.
Huh.
Just the perfect, amazing 3D surround sound just in headphones.
Wow.
Yeah, if you look at just that video, Binaural Barbershop,
Binaural,
blow your mind. Yeah, any more?
Sticking with the low vision thing, I do a bit of iPhone development, and they've got a toolkit for voiceover where you know, for low vision, you press your finger around, you can sort of move it around and get a feel for where all the controls are. And I've heard a lot of articles that sort of say that you might have your visual layout of your app or your game, you might have settings and options in one corner and different controls sort of laid out visually that make sense. But for people that can't see the screen, that's not always the best way to do it. So you might have to totally rethink that and place everything in different areas. As a visual person sort of closing my eyes and trying to do that, it's a bit hard to sort of gauge what might be the best ways to lay that out. Have you found anything from sort of...
yeah, but it's kind of two sides. Firstly, that again, that kind of thing, people will go too late. So even if it's not an optimal layout, people will still play it just because they can and will go to the effort. But obviously, if you can optimise it, then that'd be a lot better. But yeah, it's kind of, there's a few things to it. So there's kind of differences in kind of ways you hold it and that kind of stuff. But the best thing is if you look at a site called Appleviz. So that's a community of blind iOS users. And yeah, if you speak to them, you'll be able to get some good volunteers to help you check out.
Appleviz?
Appleviz, yeah.
With a Z or a
S?
S. Thank you.
Yeah, so it's worth looking into as well because there's quite a small number of voiceover friendly games. If you have got something like a puzzle game where getting the lenses set to it, then you get some quite loyal customers.
Yeah, because Craig does work with me, and we do game books, like it's all text. And since day one, we talked about doing voiceover stuff, and kind of hanging around.
Yes.
This one was like, we're
One,
I'm like, 2 people plus Craig, so
yeah, it's nice. I mean, that's the thing, unless you are talking about, because you can actually just do a little check, like is voiceover running, and that can let you serve up different versions of the interface.
Yeah, I mean, because it's actually probably easier to just change on one interface and just have like another voiceover. We talked about this one.
Yeah. But actually, that's another point. Something that I'd urge everyone to do if you can. That little check that you do is voiceover running. You can also hook that into analytics and find out exactly how many people are using voiceover per game. And that goes for all games in general, which is quite interesting at the moment because so many games, especially AAA ones, are so absolutely crammed full of like planetary metric stuff. Getting loads of fine detailed information on every tiny little thing that happens in the game. But at the same time, the accessibility stuff is in settings menus. They just haven't made that connection. So speaking to quite a big studio about this, it's like, yeah, I've always wondered how many people actually use the subtitles. Just stick analytics, I can that's the thing, if you can actually get hard facts on how many people are actually using that feature, all the ammunition you need to implement it next time. Or if you work in the studio to talk to your exec about and say, well, this feature actually generated X amount of profit, but you think it's better to develop and all that kind of stuff. So that's things unique to games compared to other industries. Like you've got if you're doing a website, you've got no way of knowing how many people pick up the website up online. But games are actually quite unique in that you can actually get all that detailed data and who's actually using stuff.
More questions? Thank you very much, Ian. Merry Christmas everyone, Happy New Year, and don't forget we're back on the 8th with Mobius's launch, so yeah.
Yay! I forgot to put the last slide up.
Oh, great. Thanks.
So, right, yeah, if you want to get hold of me, if there's anything that you forgot about asking or didn't want to ask in the group setting, just drop me a line. The second one there, that's developer guidelines. If anyone's done web accessibility stuff and has come across workout, if not, don't worry, but it's that kind of thing, like lists of best practices. A bit easier to use than what I did. The last one there's actually a game accessibility special interest group within IGDA, which it's not massively active, but the main thing is its mailing list. It's a really good place to have discussions about stuff and find out about news and that kind of stuff. So I recommend signing up for that as well.
Awesome.
So, to the right.
The button.
Ow.
You're not like